The sound of thoughts. I didn't know my boss was a hypocrite until I could hear what he thought. But that revelation came weeks after the world first cracked open in my cramped apartment, revealing the ugly truth about the man I thought I loved. It started on a damp Friday night when Nick Burns came home whistling. On paper, he was everything I'd wanted: dependable, ambitious, a junior sales rep with genuine charisma that could turn skeptics into believers. I'd watched him work magic at networking events, reading people like open books, knowing exactly what each person needed to hear to feel valued. He had this gift for making you feel like the most important person in the room, like he truly saw you. That skill, that warmth, had charmed me into splitting rent on a shoebox apartment in the city, convinced we were building something real together. What I didn't see was how he cataloged every weakness, every generous impulse, like evidence in a case he was building against me. I didn't see any of it until a ringing headache split behind my eyes and the world sharpened like a camera snapping into focus. I reached for Nick's hand to ask about his day. Just a simple touch, and a voice that wasn't mine exploded inside my skull. What a gullible girl. 2 compliments and she floats. Rent paid, pantry stocked, and she still thinks this is love? Once I close Renee, I'm done playing house. God, she's so easy to manage. The shock hit me like ice water. Renee King, his department lead, 40-something, divorced, and according to Nick's spoken words, formidable. The word I heard in his mind was different sponsor. I let go of his hand and smiled, my face feeling like it belonged to someone else. How was work? Great, babe. Just great. He headed for the shower, still whistling that same cheerful tune that now sounded like a dirge. Questioning reality. For 3 days, I convinced myself I was having a breakdown. The rational part of me cataloged evidence: stress from work, the fight we'd had last week about money, maybe a brain tumor. I Googled auditory hallucinations at 2 a.m., researching everything from schizophrenia to carbon monoxide poisoning. I bought a detector. I made a doctor's appointment. Then I canceled it when the receptionist's handshake during a routine office visit flooded me with her irritation about double-booked appointments and her worry about her son's drug problem. Mrs. Patterson again probably wants to change her appointment for the 3rd time this week. God, I hope Jake didn't steal money from my purse again. I yanked my hand back like I'd touched a live wire. She looked at me strangely. Are you all right, dear? Fine, I managed. Just static shock. But I wasn't fine. I was either losing my mind or the impossible had become possible. Neither option felt particularly comforting. Learning the rules. The coffee shop on 5th Street became my laboratory, though the education nearly destroyed me. Over the next week, I discovered that this impossible thing had rigid parameters. Skin contact was required. Always. A handshake with the mailman revealed his worry about his daughter's tuition and his secret shame about the gambling debt he'd hidden from his wife. A brush against a stranger's arm on the subway showed me her grocery list, her loneliness, her desperate hope for a text from someone named Marcus, and her mother's recent cancer diagnosis. But the cost escalated with terrifying speed. After 20 minutes of accidentally reading thoughts during my commute, my head pounded like someone was driving railroad spikes behind my eyes. By day 3, I was vomiting from the cognitive load, trying to sort my thoughts from theirs, my emotions from the emotional debris left behind by strangers. The leakage was worse than I'd initially realized. Touch someone for more than a few seconds, and fragments of their thoughts would echo in my mind for hours afterward, sometimes days. The mailman's financial anxiety haunted me until I found myself checking my own bank balance obsessively, his shame becoming mine. The stranger's loneliness made me cry in my kitchen without understanding why, her grief over her mother's illness settling into my chest like a tumor I couldn't cut out. By the end of the first week, I realized the true horror. The emotions weren't just bleeding through, they were staying. Each person I touched left psychological fingerprints that accumulated like psychological poison. I'd touch my coffee cup and remember the barista's hangover. I'd sit on my couch and feel echoes of my neighbor's heartbreak seeping through the walls of consciousness, until I couldn't tell which despair was mine and which belonged to strangers. On day 7, I touched a homeless man's hand while giving him change, and his suicidal ideation nearly dragged me under. For 20 minutes, I stood on the bridge downtown, his voice in my head whispering that the water would be warmer than the cold concrete of existence, that no one would miss us anyway. I only snapped out of it when my phone rang. The sound of my own ringtone, something he'd never heard, broke the spell and reminded me who I was. That's when I understood prolonged exposure didn't just show me thoughts. It threatened to erase me entirely. With Nick, I didn't want to be careful anymore. The discovery, while steam hissed behind the bathroom door that Friday night, I made a choice that would change everything. I checked his phone. No passcode. No caution. Just a blunt tally of promises spilling across the screen to someone who wasn't me. The messages painted a picture of calculated seduction that made my stomach turn. He begged Renee for selfies. She sent him hotel receipts. He promised her things he'd never offered me: trips to Paris, dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, a future that had my name carefully erased from every sentence. Can't wait to start our real life together. This temporary situation is almost over. You deserve so much better than what you have now. I'm just waiting for the right moment to make the transition. I screenshotted everything, my hands shaking while my head stayed unnaturally clear. The part of me that could listen and sort and slice felt unblinking and sharp, like I'd developed a new kind of vision that cut through lies to expose the rot beneath. When Nick emerged from the bathroom, toweling his hair with that same easy smile, I had a paper ledger waiting on the counter. 12 months together, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. $800 a month from me for rent, split should be $400. That's $4,800. Groceries, utilities, dinners out when you conveniently forgot your wallet. I slid the stack of printed messages beside the numbers. Call it 15 grand even. Cash or transfer? The color leaked from his face like water from a broken dam. Lily, you can't be serious. We're together. We were never together. I cut him off. I was just your most convenient lie. He tried to negotiate then, that familiar charm switching on like a spotlight. For a moment, I could see exactly why I'd fallen for him, the earnest eyes that seemed to hold nothing back, the way he leaned forward like your words were the most important thing he'd ever heard, the smile that made you feel chosen. Babe, those messages. Renee's just a client. I was being professional, telling her what she wanted to hear. You know how sales works. You can't possibly think I think you have 10 minutes to decide, I said, picking up my jacket. I'm going to the copy shop. Lily, wait. But I was already walking away, and his voice behind me carried a note of panic I'd never heard before. My phone pinged before I reached the hall. Amount received $15,000. I sat on the stairwell and cried for 5 minutes, then laughed for 2. Then I called a real estate agent and started planning a life built on truth instead of lies. New beginnings and old patterns. The apartment hunting took 2 weeks. I found a 1-bedroom that was everything my old place wasn't. Clean lines, functioning appliances, windows that actually opened to let in light. It sat in the shadow of Sterling Analytics' downtown tower, close enough to walk to work, far enough from memories of Nick's deceptions. I posted a photo of the key fob without thinking. New place. Fresh start. The reply came 30 seconds later. Where? It was from a contact I'd carefully hidden from my stories months ago, Adam Sterling, my boss. The youngest executive in the firm, all sharp suits and sharper stares. A man who built products and people with the same cold efficiency, who could reduce grown men to stammering apologies with a single look. I stared at the comment until it vanished. He'd deleted it, but the damage was done. He knew where I lived now, knew I'd made some kind of major life change. I deleted the post and made tea with shaking hands, wondering what it meant that Adam Sterling was paying attention to my Instagram stories. In the break room Monday morning, Josh Adams' executive assistant and apparently his college friend was dispensing gossip with his usual enthusiasm. You know what's weird is less than #0. 6 hashes greater than, he said, settling beside me with coffee and a pastry. Adam's got this old photo in his desk drawer. Really old, like high school old. Girl in it looks familiar, but I can't place her. He leaned closer conspiratorially. And get this, he still writes letters. Actual handwritten letters. Who does that anymore? Always around the same time each year, always mails them to some small town upstate. My stomach tightened with something that felt like premonition. Ever wonder why Adam doesn't date? Josh continued. Guy's got everything, money, looks, power, but I've never seen him with anyone. Says it's complicated. He lowered his voice. I think he's got someone. Has for years. Called her the one who got away once when he was drunk at my wedding. I stirred my coffee and tried to look casually interested rather than desperately curious. But something cold was spreading through my chest, the recognition that I might be walking into a story already in progress. The confrontation Sunday morning brought cramps and the humbling necessity of a corner store run. I was debating tampons versus chocolate when I heard Nick's voice behind me, louder than necessary. Watch where you're going. I turned to find him in an ill-fitting blazer that probably came from Renee's credit card, arms draped around the woman I recognized from his Instagram stories. Renee looked up at him with the desperate sweetness of someone who'd been buying love by the installment for too long, her eyes bright with the kind of hope that made my chest ache for her. Honey, Nick purred, examining her foot where she'd bumped into a display. Look how red your poor toes are. I'll rub them for you at home. The performance was flawless, concerned boyfriend, protective and attentive. If I didn't know better, I might have believed it myself. Ugh, I said before I could stop myself. Nick's face rearranged itself shock, then practiced superiority. Lily. Following me? We broke up. I'm with Renee now. This is love, don't try to ruin it. I'm not interested in garbage in a new bag, I replied, meeting his eyes and then hers. If you're going to keep him inside. He gripped my elbow then, still needing the last word, and his thoughts crashed into me like a freight train. How can she afford that fancy building? Must be hoping I'll take her back. God, she looks desperate. Bet she's broke already without me managing her finances. Must be nice, he said aloud, his voice dripping with false concern, upgrading so fast. New sugar daddy? A voice slid into the conversation like a blade cutting through tension. She's here for me. Adam Sterling stood 2 aisles down in running gear, gray hoodie, black athletic pants, looking like winter itself had decided to go casual. Up close, he seemed larger than life, broad shoulders and sharp lines, and the kind of presence that made small spaces feel smaller. His dark hair was slightly messed from exercise, and there was something different about seeing him outside the context of conference rooms and corner offices. Nick's mouth fell open. He'd never seen Adam before, of course. Real power had never been Nick's game. He specialized in middle management and women with good credit scores. This is your boyfriend? He sneered, looking at him up and down with the practiced dismissal of someone who equated worth with designer labels. Thrift store hoodie. Bet he's angling for a sugar mama too? The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adam turned slightly toward Nick, and I felt the shift in the air like a storm front moving in. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made smart people step back. Which building? Adam asked, voice deadly quiet. Tower 2, 32nd floor, Nick said, puffing out his chest like a peacock displaying plumage. Penthouse style. The developer's last name is Sterling, richest man in the state. What a coincidence. A smile ghosted across Adam's mouth, there and gone like lightning. Tower 2 is lease only, he said. I'm terminating yours. Move out today. He turned away without waiting for a response, phone already at his ear. Nick barked a laugh, but I could see uncertainty creeping into his eyes. Bluff all you want. Renee bought it outright, but doubt was blooming in Renee's face like ink in water, and when Adam's call ended 30 seconds later, that doubt exploded into frantic phone calls and breathless explanations to someone who clearly wasn't interested in excuses. I watched the entire charade collapse in real time, Renee's face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally fury as she understood she'd been paying for a rental Nick had claimed to own. By the time I finished shopping, Nick and Renee were loading suitcases into a taxi, their voices carrying through the parking lot in a symphony of accusations and denials. I caught up with Adam at the end of the block. Mr. Sterling, thank you for the assist. His gaze slid over me, assessing in that way he had of cataloging information and filing it away for later use. When I touched his arm to stop him, his thoughts flooded my mind, clear and sharp. Your onboarding medical said your eyesight was 2015. Odd, because your judgment with men is legally blind. He didn't say it aloud. Instead, next time, pick better. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from his number. Next time you date, bring him to me first. Building trust and corporate warfare Monday morning in the parking garage brought a new humiliation. Nick was taking selfies with a matte gray coupe, positioning himself carefully to include the hood ornament and Sterling Analytics tower in the background. Renee got me a car, he called when he saw me, his voice carrying across the concrete like he wanted witnesses. $1 million build. She appreciates ambition. I looked at the car's sleek lines, custom interior visible through tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that cost more than most people's houses. Then I looked at Nick standing beside it like a catalog model. Then why are you standing outside it? I asked. Doors stuck. Waiting for a tech. The passenger door opened with a soft click. Adam glanced over the roof at me, eyebrows raised in a question I understood immediately. I slipped into the passenger seat, and the space felt impossibly intimate, all clean lines and precision engineering that smelled like leather and something expensive. Adam watched me scoot to the far edge of the seat. When I brushed his arm, reaching for the seatbelt, his thought came through clear as daylight. So, in your head, I'm that wide? Not wide, I said too quickly. Proportionate. Proportionate. Jesus. The thought came with a flash of embarrassment and buried amusement that he didn't let show on his face. I moved closer to the center of the seat. Some of the ice around him seemed to thaw. At the office, my team watched our arrival with the fascination usually reserved for car crashes. The sight of me getting out of Adam Sterling's personal vehicle was enough to stop conversations mid-sentence. Sterling wants you, someone hissed when I sat down at my desk, like they were passing along state secrets. I took a breath and went to find out what this was about. Adam's new assistant, hair like a shampoo commercial, nerves like live wires, turned as I approached his office. She was carrying a tray with what looked like his usual morning coffee, but her hands were shaking just enough to make me nervous. Coffee arced through the air where Adam had been standing a half-second earlier. He'd already moved, predator quick, stepping directly into my path. The coffee hit the wall behind his desk with a splash that would have soaked him if he'd been slower. When his arm brushed mine during the movement, his thoughts hit me at full volume. Please, but not to her. Different voice, older memory, tinged with desperation. Then, sharp with present irritation. Oh, women. Throwing coffee to get attention. I'm letting you go, he told the assistant, his voice carrying no emotion at all. HR will discuss severance. She left in tears and wounded dignity, muttering something about how she'd only been trying to be helpful. Adam turned his laptop toward me without preamble. Your pitch deck needed editing. I made it usable. You'll present with me this afternoon. The screen showed my proposal for the pharmaceutical consulting contract, but it had been completely transformed. My careful bullet points had been restructured into a narrative that was somehow both more compelling and more ruthless. He'd found the weak spots I hadn't even known existed and turned them into strengths. A smile tugged at one corner of his mouth, brief, dangerous as winter sunlight. The Peterson Group thinks they're interviewing us. They're not. But when we arrived at the partner firm that afternoon, Adam made his first miscalculation in what I suspected was a very long time. When plans fail, the Peterson Group occupied a marble monument to pharmaceutical excess on the waterfront, all soaring glass and abstract sculptures that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Their conference room overlooked the harbor, floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a toy model below. Their VP, Marcus Webb, according to the nameplate on the mahogany table, had the kind of handshake that lingered too long and gripped too tight. When his palm pressed against mine, his thoughts flooded my consciousness like sewage backing up through a drain. Not interested in partnering. Just want the tech. Poach the code. Launch my own shop. And the girl, yeah, definitely get her on my team. Or at least on my desk. The thoughts were accompanied by images that made my skin crawl, detailed fantasies about what he'd like to do with the power dynamic he imagined he could create. During Adam's presentation, which was flawless, as expected, Webb leaned close to me, his hand settling on my shoulder like I was furniture he owned. "Impressive work," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Maybe we should discuss your role in all this over dinner." "Just the two of us." I slapped him before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He recoiled, then smiled, immediately making it my fault. Temper. "Adam, you sure you have control of your people?" Adam had been prepared for pushback on pricing. He'd been ready for negotiations over timeline and deliverables. He hadn't been prepared for this. I watched him recalculate in real time, his careful strategy crumbling as he processed what had just happened. "We're done here," he said, already closing his laptop. But his movements were stiff, mechanical, and I could see the fury building behind his eyes. But Webb wasn't finished. Shame. Could have been profitable for everyone. He leaned back in his chair, studying us like specimens. Though I suppose some people prefer to learn the hard way about how business really works. The threat was implicit, but clear across us, and we'll make sure you never work in this industry again. In the elevator afterward, Adam was silent until we reached the parking garage. Then he turned to me, his face a mask I couldn't read. "What did you hear from him?" he asked quietly. I told him. All of it. The plans to steal our intellectual property, the sexual harassment, the threats. I watched his expression go from cold to arctic. When I touched his arm, his thoughts were a chaos of self-recrimination. Should have researched him better. Should have seen this coming. Should have protected her. Now, Lily's been humiliated, and we've lost the biggest deal of the quarter. "It's not your fault," I said quietly. His eyes sharpened with sudden focus. "How did you?" He stopped. Started again. "What exactly did you hear?" So I told him about that too. About the impossible thing that had been happening to me, about the rules I'd learned, about the cost of knowing too much about what people really thought. Adam listened without interruption, his face giving nothing away. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he made 2 calls, one to his lawyer, one to someone who seemed to know things about people that nobody should know. "You don't have to," I started. "Yes," he said quietly, "I do. No one threatens my people." 3 days later, Marcus Webb was marched out of Peterson Group by compliance officers. The list of allegations ran long enough for its own table of contents: sexual harassment, intellectual property theft, embezzlement, and a few charges I didn't recognize, but that sounded expensive and federal. "Thank you," I said when the news broke. "Don't thank me," Adam replied. "Thank whoever gave you the ability to see what was really happening." It was the first time he'd acknowledged that my gift might be useful for more than just personal protection. Learning to choose. That night, we parked under my building, and Adam stepped into the elevator with me without being asked. "You don't have to walk me up," I said. "I'm going home," he replied, pressing my floor button. He stepped out with me and headed directly across the hall, pulling keys from his pocket. "You live here?" I asked, remembering the mysterious neighbor who'd paid a year's rent up front for privacy. "Used to stay in the penthouse," he said, which in Adam's speak probably meant he'd gotten bored with having too much space. "Too big. I like quiet." 2 weeks later, we were having dinner at his place when his phone rang. A client crisis, the kind that required immediate attention and careful handling. "I should take this," he said, already reaching for the phone. For a moment, I considered touching his hand. I could have listened to the conversation through his thoughts, understood exactly what was happening, what the client was really asking for beneath their words. It would have been efficient, strategic, the kind of information gathering that had made us so successful. Instead, I moved to the window and looked out at the city, giving him privacy. The choice felt significant somehow, like I was drawing a line between who I could be and who I wanted to be. When he hung up 20 minutes later, he found me there. "You didn't," he started. "I chose not to listen," I said. "There's a difference." His thoughts were wonder and relief tangled together. She could know everything, but she's choosing to let me tell her. "The Henderson deal is falling apart," he said. 3 months of negotiations down the drain because their CEO decided he wants to go in a different direction. "I'm sorry. What do you need?" He kissed me instead of answering, and his thoughts were a symphony of gratitude and something deeper. Something that sounded like love learning to trust itself. That night brought dead plumbing and the humbling necessity of knocking on Adam's door in a towel to ask for shower privileges. He opened it wearing only a towel himself, and for a moment my brain forgot how to process visual information. Water collected along the ridges of muscle that looked hand-carved from marble, and his hair was dark and damp against his neck. "My shower's out," I managed, addressing the doorframe because looking directly at him felt dangerous. 10 minutes. I'll only use the shower." "Use it," he said, stepping back to let me pass. His bathroom was a study in expensive minimalism, black stone, chrome fixtures, a shower that could have doubled as a small concert hall. I concentrated on tile grout and water temperature because every time I closed my eyes, they photographed his torso in perfect detail. When I emerged, he was on the couch in a robe, laptop open, glasses perched on his nose. He looked like a very expensive problem I wanted to solve. He glanced up when he heard me, and his thoughts were baiting and boyish both. Wonder if she liked what she saw. "Not yet," he said without looking up from his screen. "You're not ready for that." The dismissal was casual, absolute, and somehow made my heart pound harder than any invitation would have. I went home with hot cheeks and the uncomfortable realization that Adam Sterling was more dangerous than I'd thought. The real test. 2 days later, news broke that Marcus Webb had been arrested on additional charges. The story made the business section with a photo that showed him in handcuffs, looking substantially less confident than he had in that conference room. Adam didn't gloat. He sent me a text with a time and address. After work, we met at a members-only restaurant where the doorman looked like he might bow if Adam asked him to. The hostess led us to a corner table that probably cost more per month than most people's rent. "Why the show?" I asked as Adam positioned us for a photo, his arm around my waist. "Webb's lawyer thinks I made you up," he said, taking the picture with the efficient movements of someone who'd done this before. Wants proof, or she'll keep claiming you were never really harassed. It was performance, strategy, legal maneuvering. My heart still responded like this was real. At the door, we nearly collided with Nick in a rented suit and fresh arrogance, a girl who looked barely legal clinging to his arm like a life preserver. "This place is 7-figure members only," he told her, loud enough for half the lobby to hear. He passed a card to the host with a flourish. My business partner Renee put me on her account. "I wonder if she cut your leash," I said, watching the host's expression freeze as he examined the card. The girl's eyes flicked between us, picking up on the tension. I showed her a few choice screenshots on my phone, messages Nick had sent Renee while he was still living with me, promises he'd made to other women, a pattern of behavior that painted a clear picture. She read in hungry horror, then swung her purse into Nick's stomach and fled toward the exit, sobbing. Nick turned on me, empty of words for once. "Enjoy prison," I said as the host politely but firmly escorted him toward the door. Adam set our photo as his lock screen that night. It should have been strategy. It felt like a promise. A month later, a new number sent me a photo my face grafted onto a body that wasn't mine, positioned in a way that would destroy any professional reputation I'd built. The demand was for $200,000 to make it disappear, or the image would go to Adam and his family and anyone else who might be interested in my true nature. The execution was clumsy, obviously Nick's work, but the amount was large enough to constitute a felony in our state. Adam went killing quiet when I showed him, the way he did before closing impossible deals. His mind unspooled with calm precision. Pay him. Document everything. Then call police. 10 years minimum, maybe more. He transferred the money without hesitation. Filed the police report before the transaction cleared. Built an unbreachable case with the methodical precision of someone who'd been planning for war. Nick called that night, sobbing apologies into static. "Lily, I'm sorry. I never meant Renee found out about the others. She cut me off. I don't have anywhere to go." I hung up and blocked the number. 3 weeks later, news broke. Former sales rep arrested in multi-state romance fraud scheme. The article detailed Nick's pattern of targeting successful women, draining their resources, then disappearing. The combined damages exceeded $2 million. He was facing 15 years. The proposal. 2 months later, Adam proposed at a highway diner because that's where we were when he realized he didn't want to wait anymore. The ring looked like a captured star, learning to sit on my finger, platinum and diamonds that caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in rainbows. "You're in a hurry," I teased, though my throat ached with the kind of happiness that feels too big for your chest. He looked away with such studied indifference, it made me laugh. "Don't get smug. I'm only doing this because you're pathetically in love with me." "Thank you," I said solemnly. "You're welcome." His ears went pink, and when I touched his hand afterward, an old memory surfaced: years of letters to a girl in a poor county, friendship that grew towards something else before illness and bad timing intervened. His search for her when he returned from graduate school. The resume that crossed his desk years later with a familiar name and a face he'd known without knowing why. He'd been watching me long before I learned to listen. I pressed my forehead to his. Yes to everything. He kissed me like he'd been waiting years to do it properly. He had. 5 years later, the Sterling Foundation, the ethical consulting division, had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when Adam first handed me that folder marked Special Projects. We occupied 3 floors now, with Sarah Chen as our director of corporate oversight and a team of investigators who'd earned reputations for uncovering fraud with almost supernatural accuracy. People didn't realize they had help. The crisis call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah's voice was tight with panic. "Lily? It's Hartwell Pharmaceuticals. They've moved up the launch of that adolescent anxiety drug. It's happening tomorrow instead of next month, and I know people are going to get hurt." I sat up, instantly alert. We'd been investigating Hartwell for months, following rumors of suppressed trial data and rushed approvals. The medication was intended for high-risk teenagers, kids who might hurt themselves if the treatment failed. What kind of hurt? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. The kind where internal testing shows the drug actually increases suicidal ideation in the first 6 weeks. They're launching anyway because the board is terrified of missing their quarterly projections. By dawn, we had a plan that would push every limit I'd learned about my abilities. Sophie Martinez was 17, brilliant, and had just been accepted to Hartwell's Emerging Voices in Mental Health Symposium under her research credentials. She was also like a daughter to Adam and me. We'd been mentoring her through our youth outreach program for 2 years, watching her channel her analytical mind toward social justice. "I'll be fine," she said, adjusting the small recording device in her watch. "I've been watching you work for years. I know how to read people." Miguel, her 15-year-old brother, had gifts that made my telepathy seem simple. He could sense emotional temperatures from across a room, feel the weight of guilt and deception like a change in barometric pressure. He was stationed at our offices, monitoring the psychic climate around Hartwell's building. Sophie's nervous but determined. He reported through our earpieces as she entered the building. The head researcher feels slimy, like he enjoys having power over vulnerable people. But as the day progressed, the cost of coordinating the operation began to overwhelm me. Every time I touched someone to read their thoughts, Sarah for updates, Adam for strategy adjustments, our tech team for security protocols, the headache intensified. The psychic load of managing so many different mental voices was like trying to conduct an orchestra where every instrument was playing a different song. By afternoon, I was seeing double. The faces on my computer screen swam in and out of focus, and I could taste copper in my mouth. Worse, I was losing track of which emotions belonged to me. Sarah's anxiety about the operation had settled into my chest like a weight. Adam's cold fury was bleeding through my thoughts, making me want to destroy Hartwell's executives with my bare hands. "Lily," Adam said quietly during a brief break, his hand hovering near my shoulder but not quite touching. "You need to step back. I can handle it." But when I tried to stand, the room tilted sideways and I had to grip the desk to keep from falling. Through Sophie's hidden camera, we watched her charm doctor. Marcus Webb, Hartwell's lead researcher. She was asking intelligent questions, expressing fascination with their facilities, somehow steering the conversation toward the specific areas we needed to document. But I could see she was getting uncomfortable. Webb was standing too close, touching her shoulder more than necessary, and there was something predatory in the way he looked at her, like she was a particularly interesting specimen. "Doctor?" "Webb," she said with perfect teenage earnestness. "I've read criticism of pharmaceutical companies rushing drugs to market. How do you ensure patient safety?" Webb's smile was patronizing at first. "Sophie, all medications have side effects. The question is whether the benefits outweigh the risks. But what if early testing shows that teenagers might hurt themselves?" I pressed my fingertips to Adam's wrist, trying to read Webb through the camera feed somehow, to understand what Sophie was walking into. The backlash of secondhand telepathy trying to read thoughts through a video connection hit me like a freight train. The pain exploded behind my eyes and I collapsed, but worse than the physical agony was the sudden, terrifying realization that I couldn't remember my own name. For a moment that felt like eternity. I was everyone I'd ever touched: the mailman's shame, the homeless man's despair, Webb's predatory hunger, Adam's cold rage, all of it compressed into a single consciousness that was no longer mine. "That's it," Adam said, already reaching for his phone. "Sophie, abort mission. Get out now." "No," I managed, fighting to surface through the psychological storm. "She's close." Webb is conflicted. I can feel it somehow, even through the camera. There's genuine guilt there, not just corporate greed. "Not worth the risk," Adam said, but Sophie was already speaking again. I watched Webb's face change a flicker of genuine conflict before the corporate mask slipped back into place. "Sophie," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard, "can I tell you something off the record?" Her camera angle shifted as she nodded. "I have a daughter your age. When we first started developing this drug, I was enthusiastic. Mental health treatment for teenagers is desperately needed." His voice dropped further. "But the board has made it clear that my daughter's college fund depends on this launch happening on schedule, regardless of what the final tests show." The raw honesty in his voice changed everything. This wasn't just corporate greed. This was a man trapped between his conscience and his family's security, between doing what was right and doing what would keep his child safe. "Dr. Webb," Sophie said carefully, "what would happen if someone with access to the real trial data made sure the FDA saw it before tomorrow's launch?" He stared at her for a long moment. "That someone would probably lose their job. Maybe face criminal charges." A pause. "But a lot of kids would stay alive." Sophie's camera showed her pulling a flash drive from her pocket. "Dr. Webb, I think you dropped this. The plan had worked, but the cost nearly destroyed me." By the time Sophie was safely out of the building, I was unconscious on the floor of our conference room, my brain finally shutting down from the overload of trying to process too many minds at once. I woke up in the hospital with Adam holding my hand, and a doctor explaining that I'd suffered what looked like a severe seizure, possibly triggered by stress and dehydration. "Nothing showed up on the MRI," she said, "but I'd recommend reducing your workload and managing stress better." If only she knew. The choice that matters. 6 months later, the Hartwell scandal had made national news. Dr. Webb had become the key whistleblower, providing internal documents that led to the largest pharmaceutical fraud case in federal history. The adolescent anxiety drug was permanently banned, and 3 executives faced prison time. Webb himself had been placed in witness protection after receiving death threats, but not before testifying that an unnamed teenager had given him the courage to come forward. "Think he'll be okay?" Sophie asked, reading the news coverage over breakfast at our place. She'd become part of our family in the months since the operation, her parents grateful for the mentorship that had helped her channel her activism in constructive directions. "Dr. Webb? He's testifying at a Senate hearing next week about pharmaceutical ethics. I think he found his calling," I said, refilling her coffee. "Besides, the government is paying his daughter's tuition now." Miguel looked up from his own tablet. The emotional signature from Hartwell's building has completely changed. Used to feel like guilt and greed mixed together. Now it just feels empty. "Good," Adam said from behind his newspaper. "Empty is better than actively malevolent." But the most important moment came that evening, when Adam's phone rang with another crisis. A pharmaceutical company called Meridian was fast-tracking a new antidepressant for teenagers, the same market Hartwell had been trying to corner. "I should take this," he said, already reaching for the phone. I could have touched his hand. Could have listened to the conversation through his thoughts, understood exactly what was happening, what the client was really asking for beneath their words. After Hartwell, I knew the stakes of missing crucial information. I knew what happened when corporate lies killed children. Instead, I moved to the kitchen and started the dishes, giving him privacy. The choice felt like stepping off a cliff, trusting that he would tell me what I needed to know without me having to steal it from his mind. When he hung up 20 minutes later, he found me there. "You didn't listen," he said, wonder and relief tangled in his voice. "I chose not to," I said. "There's a difference." His thoughts were exactly what I'd hoped. She could know everything, but she's choosing to trust me instead. "Meridian Pharmaceuticals," he said. "Their CEO wants to hire us to verify their safety protocols before launch. Says they want to avoid another Hartwell situation. Could be genuine." Could be a trap. Could be, he agreed. Want to find out together? I turned from the sink and really looked at him, this man who'd built his life on control and information, who was now asking me to be his partner instead of his secret weapon. Yes, I said. Together. When I touched his hand to seal the agreement, his thoughts were clear, finally. After all these years, still finally. Like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment, this choice, this chance to build something extraordinary with someone who understood that different wasn't dangerous, it was just different. Different could expose lies and protect the innocent. Different could choose truth over convenience, trust over certainty. And sometimes, different was exactly what the world needed. The end.